This is Brian Cantor coming at you live from CCW Nashville. This is the winter iteration of the most iconic, largest customer contact series, and it is in Music City, the heart of country music. But we're going to be talking about listening to something different today. We're going to be talking about listening to our customers and their interactions with our business. To get us there, we have Brian LaRoche of CallMiner Eureka, as well as Schott of HomeAdvisor, and they're going to be offering their opinion here, their take, their success story when it comes to successfully interacting with customers, successfully listening to those interactions. So Brian, I want to start with you because people hear speech analytics, they hear about interaction analytics, and they may have a sense of, well, this will let us know what our customers want or what they're thinking. But there's so many more applications, there's so many more ways to use those insights, use those tools. So what right now should be top of mind as we talk about customer listening, as we talk about analytics?
Sure. So, the initial iteration, or I think the use cases that a lot of people use speech analytics for, was for the obvious ability to capture all of the interactions and do a better job of doing quality assurance. So capturing all the interactions, and so instead of that random sampling of calls, which typically are about 0.5% of all the interactions that took place, to be able to consistently analyze all of the interactions, and it helped to improve the agent's performance and ultimately the customer experience. The other side of the coin now is that that's become accepted. The use case for compliance, the use case for QA has become pretty well accepted within the industry. What customers are really starting to realize is not only am I listening to the voice of the agent and how they react to customers, but what can I derive as insights, actionable insights, out of the voice of the customer? What are they saying about your products, your technologies, your process? All of those really critical things that are so important to have an organization optimize their customer outcomes.
Well, as someone who works on the solution provider side, surely Brian has a lot of insight into what can be done and recommendations about what organizations should be doing. But Chad, you worked with them, you decided you needed this to make it happen. You needed to understand what was going on within your interactions, how you could use analytics to empower your agents and your experience. So what drew you to this situation? What were you ultimately trying to get out of your analytics investment?
Well, maybe ironically, just what he said was kind of the old boring stuff. For a customer with a traditional QA approach, you touch a very small percentage. So when the rep says, that's just a bad call, he very well may be correct. So the first step we wanted to do is get more feedback more consistently to drive coaching. We're a coaching culture. Can we give them more feedback? It gets pretty interesting pretty quick when you say, Tommy's killing it. What is Tommy doing? So can we define the behaviors and practices that happen in his call, because that becomes best practice for every new sales rep coming in or new cares rep, and we can integrate that into training. And then the flip side is there are things that put you at risk, right? Certain behaviors, certain positioning statements. If we can catch those proactively, we can, from a compliance perspective, risk mitigation, protect ourselves. And then uncover just new opportunities. The power of the way I try to get focused on folks on my team focused is, what is something that we cannot get feedback anywhere in the world, but we can get through using this tool? And if we focus on that, that's how we build buy-in, that's how we uncover things that people aren't thinking about, and then we can quantify the value of that. It's not inexpensive. There's an investment you have to make. Part of what I'll say later is, how do you invest? You can invest in a whole lot more people and get from 1% to 2, or you can invest a similar amount or less in technology and get feedback across the board. But we're really trying to uncover opportunities and create sustainable revenue.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying there, what it speaks to is this idea that scores are arbitrary. We have a metric, we have a score that tells you, okay, we're doing a pretty good job or we're doing a pretty poor job. And yeah, it's good to know, when you want to be able to benchmark your progress, but really what you're looking for is the why behind those scores and also the next step to improve those. Yeah. So first of all, what within the interaction, what within agent behavior is leading to you're either satisfying customers or not satisfying them, you're either engaging agents or you're not, and then what can you do next? So how though do you actually start to action that? So you have the data, you have the sense of why, you have the sense of purpose. What is that next step so that you're not just looking at a big to-do list of everything you can do, but instead you're figuring out, okay, here's what we're going to prioritize, here's who we're going to communicate it to, so that this all turns into a better experience?
Well, trade-offs. You talk a lot about trade-offs. We were joking earlier, the three of us, like it can do a million things, and the problem is it can do a million things. So you have to have a plan, and then you've got to do the best you can to figure out what the opportunity is to prioritize that way. A lot of what we do, and you said, what's a score? Well, there's a phrase I use, and I'll talk about later. We objectify the subjective. Like one score by itself is not very helpful, right? You may be being consistent with how you derive it, but the score itself is not. But when you compare it across thousands, the outliers are where you can focus. So a lot of what we've done is saying, let's look at behaviors that are probably predictive of something good, maybe something bad, and then who are the folks furthest away from the norm? Because then if you can bring them to the norm, you can capture all that upside or protect all that downside. So scores do matter in the aggregate, but prioritization is you have to have a plan. This is the focus you need to have. I'm trying to uncover lots of revenue, sustainable revenue. I can do it 20 different ways, but I don't have the wherewithal to do 20 different things, so I've got to focus on 4 things, and you best you can, where do you think you have the impact, and then prove it out.
And it sounds like this helps you with the illustration, because I mean, we go to these conferences all the time. You hear certain brands have this like very unique, really awesome experience. They do cool stuff in their call center. They have a specific way of speaking to customers that's really amazing. We sit there, we admire it, we want to talk to them, shake their hands after the fact. But when you think about your organization, not all that's going to apply. And so what this tool, what a more listening-oriented approach seems like it allows you to do, is figure out within the context of your processes, your technology, your organization, what are the standout behaviors that we can trumpet, that we can brag about.
Well, yeah, we always try to focus on the positive, because that's what really drives the buy-in. If all you're doing around is finding all the bad and whacking people with sticks all the time, it's tough to get buy-in, and that's not the culture we're trying. But the flip side is eminently true. If you can define specifically what Sally or Tommy is doing, and you can encapsulate that and then cross-reference into the performance of the folks they sell or their behavior, then you get a best practice to sell. So we're constantly striving to do that. You just can't look past the opportunity to protect yourself when the bad stuff is happening. So finding the balance of using it on both sides, but trying to build value in it. I say later, like that big brother, is he watching? Yeah, he is. But he's not so bad. He gives me great ideas on how to improve myself. So big brother doesn't have to be bad.
Any ideas for breaking the self-affirmation cycle? Because I think that, a lot of times you want to be able to look to the data and say, okay, our training was right, and this guy did exactly what we said in the script, and therefore that's why his numbers are phenomenal. Or this guy was our model recruiting candidate, and that's why he's putting up great scores, whatever it may be. But sometimes this data is going to show you that, hey, you were wrong. What you thought was right is not what you should be doing. Or there's someone who follows a different trend, and that actually turns out to be better for your customers. I'd imagine that, from a high level, it's easy to say, hey, we need to follow this. But on the more functional level, there may be some more inertia. There may be some more concern that, hey, I don't want to be proven wrong, so let me try to kind of negotiate the numbers and make it right. How do you build that culture where you say, hey, this is irrefutable evidence. This is clearly what our customers are looking for. This is clearly what our agents are doing. Let's take action based on that. Let's focus on the numbers, not what we thought the best practices were.
I suspect that's always going to be something you're going to subliminally fight. I have a lot of faults. I don't think that's one of my faults, because finding it is finding it. The simple truth is, as bad as a call might be, there's always something positive, and the flip side is even more true. What do you do with a guy who's killing it, but not doing everything the way they could? Do you think you can still coach that guy to the better? We think so, but that's a pragmatic thing. I'm not all that focused on validating anything. It's trying to say, what is it? Because we haven't had the opportunity to define what good is. It's a little easier to define what bad is, but when we find it, then we just trump it. So I don't think there's a lot of sacred cows.
And Brian, you probably have to deal with this perspective from another perspective, because you have people coming to you because they have a goal in mind, and sometimes maybe that goal is wrong. And on the one hand, you want them to be like, you want to affirm what they're looking for, but on the other hand, they're trusting you to help them uncover the real realities of their experience.
Yeah, and so 2 quick stories come to mind. To that very point of, this is what we believe they should be working for. These are the metrics of the calls and the KPIs that are to be achieved. So, one of the holy grails that everyone talks about in terms of, automated analytics will help reduce average handle time by determining where the inefficiencies are in the call, the silence, those types of things. But what's interesting, one example that comes to mind, we had a customer who was convinced that the AHTs need to be lower, but after benchmarking a number of the successful efforts, this was in a proactive sales organization style, not dissimilar to what Chad's company does, they discovered the most successful calls, the calls that led to the best sales results, the least cancellations, and the highest compliancy rating. In other words, they did everything. They told the customer what the product was, if the cancellation policies, if they wanted to. They did all of that stuff. They found those calls were 3.5 minutes longer. So all of a sudden, the whole notion of let's drive AHT down really got kind of flipped on its head. And so now they were, to Chad's point, where they're looking to benchmark what are the best calls, what are the best characteristics, what are they saying and doing. It really was a complete twist off of what the organization had believed. Another quick example of that, another organization believes, and as we do believe, is that we will actually help an organization's agents through the use of automated analytics to accelerate their training development and shorten their ramp time. One of the, again, discoveries with another very successful organization that uses this technology was discovering that after identifying what were the strengths and weaknesses of new hires, they actually analyzed them as a group. And they discovered that there were certain key learning elements that actually they needed to take and spend more time on. So instead of shortening the training, they actually elongated it an extra week to focus on those specific things that they found that new hires were kind of being challenged with. So, you know, the initial notion was we're going to shorten training time by 2 weeks, and instead they added a week, but the results were after that additional week, the ramp acceleration did increase. Agents got to, you know, the optimal performance levels in a shorter period of time.
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to understanding what your meaningful goals are, what really matters to you, and sometimes what you thought was the intermediate, the pathway to that is going to be wrong. Now, Brian, you know, a lot of times people talk about the idea of actionable analytics. People love actionable. But I often feel like when they talk about the topic, they set the bar a little too low. It's like they just think, oh, data you can take action on. That's not just purely descriptive, that there is some sort of, you know, predictive or some sort of advisory insight to. I look at actionable a little bit more farther down along the line, where actually you're just by looking at that number, the right stakeholder has what they need at the right time to make a decision.
Yeah.
As a provider, what are you doing to kind of cultivate or offer that higher degree of actionability, where it's not just we're going to throw a bunch of data at you and hopefully you make the right decision, but we're going to put the right data in a format you understand and can act on in the right moment, right stakeholder at the right time.
Right. So yeah, we have a lot of we've actually developed what we call playbooks. And the notion of the playbooks is to actually help identify what are particular objectives for the organization, and not only help them with the execution, the configuring of the analytics to associate the appropriate categories and scorecards specific to that objective, but also then how do you socialize that information. So the socialization is kind of the GPS aspect, right, of this technology, because again, we can provide you the insights. That's what this technology will do. How do you take and move that information forward? How do you engage the appropriate stakeholders? How do you socialize that information within the constituency associated with that particular objective? So the playbooks help to on the communication and kind of mapping and strategy side of things as well. So it is the really critical point. Actionizing those insights is not something you can trivialize, because again, we can tell you, we can lay out the map for you, but unless you take the journey, unless you actually take that prescribed route, you're going to find you're going to have detours and delay achieving the objective you sought to accomplish in that particular goal.
So I think there's a couple of things I wanted to add later, maybe they'll come out, but I say all the time, as a quality org, you're a feedback org. Your job is to give feedback, and the goal of that feedback is to use it to make improvements and drive better results. So for feedback to be good, it should be objective. You know, subjective is the sexy stuff, but you got to avoid that. So it's got to be actionable. What am I going to do with this?
Right.
And ideally, it's timely. And in the old world of QA, it's hard to make it timely. In the new world, where theoretically you can give feedback on every call, it becomes timely. But in terms of the actionability in our world, we're talking about all this technology. We're all human beings, and the actionability is, can I use it to coach? And can I document the coach? And do I have a culture of accountability to hold them to it? But it's someone else's responsibility, and that is something difficult to juggle. Yes, I've got better technology and I'm giving you unique insights that you haven't had to give feedback. You still have to coach your rep. You still have to drive buy-in. I can constantly reinforce, but it's never a singular vacuumized, it's just technology that solves everything. You got to do it with human beings the same way we've always done it.
Absolutely, and I think the best example is when you have a best of both worlds, when you have a technology partner that is cognizant of that and say can offer you the advice or at least think about what challenges you may have to go through.
Another point I had there, right? So we, like any other, we're pretty proud. No one knows our business. We know our business, and it's not like others. And there's always a lot of truth to that. But the notion of the playbooks is they're like, oh, yeah. However, it's 85% the same, and we've addressed those, and we get to believe what we believe. You get to get us down the path in terms of which direction to go in the process to use. It's kind of the best of all worlds. But everything's a little unique. The point is, can you locate it? Can you quantify this thing, this behavior, this action, this combination? And then can you do something about it to improve it?
Yeah.
And then did you have a baseline so you can measure the improvement? Because as I said, we're trying to create sustainable revenue that we can justify by using this unique technology.
Yeah, and so even though we don't want to talk about, we criticize self-affirmation and just trying to prove what you already know, clearly you have some things in mind for 2019 and beyond, things you want to achieve that hopefully analytics will play a role in allowing you to achieve them. So you're at CCW, you're thinking about the year ahead. What is kind of that main focus if you had to prioritize that top objective that you're looking for?
So I simply want to prove beyond any doubt that this is a tool that can create these revenue streams, right? We have a lot of things we as a company wanted to do. I'm one person asking for a couple things, but everyone has a justification in terms of what we can spend and what we think we can, derive from that, and I've got a bar that I've got to meet. So my primary goal is to prove unequivocally, and I've got all the buy-in, people believe it, but we've got to demonstrate that against some other things. And we're starting small, right? We're focused on the sales side, but when you talk about on the customer care side, getting average hold time, that makes sense logically, but if you can define that call was an inbound call because of this topic versus that, I may want that first topic to be 3 times as long because I know that investing the time pays off, whereas this other one, no, I actually want to keep it shorter because I know that the payoff's not there. We're not to that level of granularity, but that's the power of the analytics engine is you can segment these type of calls and you can hold yourself to those metrics in a more discrete way. So we'll get there as well.
Now, Brian, we open with me asking sort of, what are some additional things that people can use analytics for that maybe they're not thinking about? Mm-hmm. What story do you want to tell, whether it's here, whether it's throughout the year, about the value this kind of data, this kind of thinking can have in terms of elevating the experience?
So this is the decade of CX. I think that's kind of the recognized primary driver for most organizations. Organizations are realizing that improving customer experience reduces customer churn, increases net promoter scores, customer satisfaction scores, and ultimately that drives higher revenue. And so we're doing a lot of, our technology continues to grow and expand to help customers realize their goals and objectives. One of the things that we are really big on this year, a big thing for us, is measuring customer effort. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of agent effort, how successful, how challenged are they in helping to facilitate the customer's objectives, but also measuring customer effort, how easy or difficult it is to do business. Did I have to enter my information twice? Did I have to punch it into the IVR, and then when I got to an agent, they asked me all the same questions all over again? So understanding how easy or difficult it is for a customer to do business with you, identify those key issues, and then modify your programs, your process, your products perhaps, and again, illuminate that information, those actionable insights to all the stakeholders in their organization so they can participate in the changes that produce realistic, sustainable improvements.
So another that you guys, like the folks at CallMiner have brought up, the desire to get analytics out of the call center or not exclusively in the call center. And in our world, like we talk later about the importance of how you think about data. So I've got these calls, but what is going to help me learn more about those calls? What's that data stream, the metadata? And you use, an API to more efficiently get it in. Well, one of the things that helps along these lines is getting the data back out. Like we've got a whole team of financial analysts who want fodder. give us fodder. So analytics gives them information about the calls that if we can get it in their hands and their environment of data visualization, they can tell a greater story. It's one of the things I think in our future is getting the data in other people's hands to tell an even stronger story.
So the power of analytics is the ability to synthesize the billions of words that are spoken into information that can be used for stakeholders throughout the organization, and providing that information to them in a format that they can use and leverage. So the API is a classic example of that. I mean, it's applying the principles of big data, right? Taking that information and then recognizing what are the key characteristics and pushing it to those vested segments of your organization. So it could be customer service, it could be product improvement, it could be any number of different.
We've used it a bit on the product side.
Yep. So and then using the power of this technology, this artificial intelligence and the machine learning to take all of that massive amount of data and be able to plot, trend, and then again actionize it.
Definitely. Well, I think you're on the right track there. I think understanding that synergy of whether you focus on the agent side, whether you focus on the customer side, they're going to be interconnected. And so if you're looking at customer effort, what do you have to do on the back end to reduce that? If you're looking at agent effort, what is the reason for doing that? How is that going to manifest in a great experience? And then not only stopping there, not just thinking about both sides of the engagement experience, but the entire organization, where you as a support function, as a sales function, as a training function, where you fit into that dynamic, what's the value, and what do they need to know to be able to A, understand what you're doing, but B, provide the requisite support, understand what they're investing in. And that's where analytics can be very valuable. That's where a design-oriented minding can be very valuable. That's where setting those objectives, but being willing to tweak those if you find different things about your customers and your environment, that's where that becomes valuable. Brian, Chad, thank you so much for joining us today. Thrilled to have you here in Nashville. Thrilled to see how your stories evolve. Thrilled to know that people are going to be truly connecting with their customers, understanding what's happening in their experiences, and taking them to the next level.
Thank you, bro.